Hi friends, my name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. I wanted to share a couple of small excerpts with you and just talk a little bit about them. The first one is something I saw on the Jimmy Dore show, and it was a clip from the State Department, not one of their finer moments of propaganda, but they were berating journalists, the State Department press sort of meeting. They were berating journalists.
We have noticed in news coverage that some outlets are incorrectly referring to Juan Guaido as the opposition leader or the self-proclaimed president. Neither is correct. Relying on Venezuela's constitution, Juan Guaido became interim president of Venezuela on January 23rd. Millions of Americans and more than 50 countries recognize Juan Guaido as interim president of Venezuela.
Let me get this straight. You're complaining because news outlets are calling him by a title that you don't think that he...
Not a complaint, pointing out, just trying to correct.
Well, it sounds like a complaint to me, and that seems pretty weak.
He's the interim president, and we don't want to...
You consider him to be the interim president, and as you say, 50 other countries outside of recognize him as the interim president. But there are more than 190 members of the United Nations, so your 50 countries is not even close to half.
It's time to act in support of democracy. And
the news coverage of calling him the legitimate leader, the president, is going to encourage more countries to recognize.
We don't want to feed into the rhetoric of the current dictator.
Okay.
In a similar vein, US Senator Marco Rubio also tried schooling the media, lambasting CNN for using the term self-proclaimed when referring to Guaido's supposed interim presidency. He said the phrase was used by Russia to undermine the constitutional legitimacy of Guaido's claim. Rubio even jokingly hinted at possible collusion between CNN and Moscow. Let's gauge the state of world opinion on the matter of Guaido's legitimacy. 54 countries recognize him as Venezuela's leader. The rest of the world either supports Nicolas Maduro, is neutral, or backs the opposition-run National Assembly, yet without recognizing Guaido.
And what's amazing about this is that, I mean, you know, the US press, the mainstream, corporate-owned mainstream media, they're just stenographers, really. And I don't know if anybody else questioned the State Department on this, but they were looking over his shoulder like, ooh, that's novel, asking a question like that. Did you see the guy when he leaned over and looked at the guy who was asking the questions and questioning this instruction by the State Department? It was almost like, ooh, that's novel. We don't get people sort of questioning the State Department like this. You know, we just take down notes. We just write what they tell us to write. I mean, that's the size of it, really. So anyway, he was just doing his job as a reporter or a journalist. I'll have to find out what his name is and put it in the information section, the guy that was questioning him. I think that I've seen him ask questions before that are sort of, and I wonder why they actually let him in there. But anyway, you're not supposed to question the State Department, you're just supposed to take down the information. Anyway, so the other thing I wanted to talk about was speaking of, you know, sort of disinformation and misinformation, which the State Department puts out all the time. There's this very interesting quote by William Casey, who was the CIA director in around 1980. And this was from his first staff meeting. And he said, and this is sort of scary, but it's not surprising, okay? But this is what William Casey, CIA director in the early 80s, said. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. I mean, it's amazing that they actually put that sort of thing out there. You know, it really is. And I saw something just, which was, it's actually something that I posted a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it was Terry Turchie, who is ex-FBI assistant director. And I actually sort of posted that clip on my channel. And he was basically admitting in public to Tucker Carlson of Fox News. I don't know if these people actually think that anybody else watches Fox News except for the really full-on conservatives and people who don't care, I don't know. But he basically admitted that the FBI works to prevent progressives from getting into office. And his excuse for why the FBI does that is because those people otherwise will cause chaos. You mean they might push more towards democracy rather than the oligarchy that you have right now in the US? I mean, you know, these people say this sort of stuff in broad daylight. They're not even hiding anymore. But the fact that this CIA director in the early 80s said that the disinformation campaign they've had going, which is started with Operation Mockingbird, sort of a few decades earlier, and they've been inserting CIA people into the press, into the Fourth Estate, all that time, and now I think he could probably say, if he was alive, mission accomplished, because that is all the Fourth Estate does now is put out disinformation and misinformation, and promote the government narrative to manufacture consent from the public for regime change and wars of choice for resources and hegemony. That's what the Fourth Estate does now. Pretty much the Fourth Estate is dead. There's only a sprinkling of independent journalists, and you know who they are if you watch this channel. Max Blumenthal, Abby Martin, Ben Norton, Rania Khalek, people like that. The Real News Network, sometimes Democracy Now! When they're not pushing regime change in Syria and the like, or anti-Russian propaganda. But there are different, I don't recommend Democracy Now!, but it's good for just getting daily information about what's going on in the US and also about Palestine. But that's about the size of it now. It's sort of there's probably some other people in the world, I'm sure. Well, there's Seymour Hersh and Noam Chomsky, although Noam Chomsky wouldn't consider himself a journalist. But anyway, there's a bunch of people really who are pushing against this mainstream government warmongering, corporate-loving narrative. Oh, and Chris Hedges, of course. But basically, it's all sewn up. The mainstream media is all sewn up. So mission accomplished, William Casey.
Terry Turchi was Deputy Assistant Director of the Counterterrorism Division of the FBI, and he joins us tonight. Terry, we originally asked you to come on tonight to talk about border security, but before we do, I want to ask you your response to this back and forth between BuzzFeed and the Special Counsel's Office. What's your take?
Sure, Tucker. Well, I'm a skeptic because of being in law enforcement, but I think it's kind of pretty simple. When you take the election and you take the House and you now convert all the committees that you have to investigating various aspects of the President of the United States, then your lifeblood has to be to react to stories. So you're going to see more stories planted so that all these committees can have a lot of work to do. And I think this is just more of the same. And I think we can expect more of this because, quite honestly, the electorate in some places is putting more and more progressives and self-described socialists in positions. And ironically, years ago when I first got into the FBI, one of the missions of the FBI in its counterintelligence efforts was to try and keep these people out of government. Why? Because we would end up with massive dysfunction and massive disinformation and massive misinformation. And it seems to me that's where we're at today. I'm glad I don't live in D.C. I don't know how you start to separate this and make head or tails from it, but it's a mess.
Anyway, that's really all I wanted to talk about. I was going to talk about what's going on in Venezuela in relation to this electricity outage. But what I'll do is I'll leave a link to the Grey Zone Project's piece on this issue and about the regime change organizations that are participating in this coup. There's the National Endowment for Democracy, and one of their smaller groups is CANVAS, Canvas. And Canvas has been grooming Juan Guaido, the self-appointed, self-elected Venezuelan, interim president. They've been grooming him, and they've also had a blueprint since about 2010 on what they would do to cause chaos in Venezuela. And one of them was one of them, I believe, was a cyber attack on the electricity grid. And it turns out that this is what the Venezuelan government believes. It was a very complex cyber attack on the Venezuelan electricity grid. And, you know, Marco Rubio, the right-wing GOP congressman, he actually got a little bit enthusiastic on Twitter and said, and after he pretty much, just after the electricity grid failed and plunged many areas of Venezuela into darkness, he put out this sort of with great glee about that, and then he sort of said, and even the backup generators aren't working. Even the local, and this is a few seconds after it happened, and even the local authorities in Venezuela did not know that the backup generators had failed. So he had prior knowledge of what was going to take place. So he sort of like, in his great glee, he just takes great delight in seeing Venezuela destroyed and their economy screaming, as does Pompeo and Bolton. But they, you know, he made a bit of a slip up and let on that he knew about the generators failing even when the local authorities in Venezuela didn't know that the backup generators had failed. So that gives you a little indication that that this is another attack, an attack on their infrastructure to make the people dissatisfied with President Maduro and cause social unrest, and also cause a sort of a panic in a way as well, and cause and I'm imagining that if they don't protect this electricity grid or from these cyber attacks, that the next one they're going to do some sort of invasion. Like, I think there was an association with electricity grid failing and Allende when he was overthrown by the US. So, but anyway, this is something that is very interesting. I find the Grey Zone project is such an amazing, the Grey Zone project with Max Blumenthal and Dan Norton and Dan Cohen and Ben Norton and Anya Parampil and a few others like that, is such an excellent news source. Like Max Blumenthal has this way of finding out things, like it's amazing. It's real great journalism, finding things out that almost nobody else seems to be able to get out, or he just sort of manages to put it all together, and you think it's almost like he does it so quickly. And of course there's probably more than one person doing the research, but it's just amazing how the Grey Zone project manages to pull out the real narrative of what's happening in these various coups and wars. And you know, he's done a great thing on the National Endowment for Democracy on the Grey Zone on YouTube. I've posted that. I'll post the link to it. It's really interesting, because they're like a CIA-backed regime change organization. That's their purpose. They pretend that they're, you know, trying to promote democracy. If ever there was a distortion of a word, it's what the US government, what Washington likes to throw that word around when talking about, when really what they're doing is destroying democracy so they can install their own person, their own dictator into that country and then take over. So, you know, watch out when, you know, we know when they start throwing around that word, or if you even see that word in relation to the government, or things where the National Endowment for Democracy has a lot, like Nancy Pelosi and all sorts of people go along to those things. All the shifty characters attend those different sort of meetings that they have. And Canvas, CANVAS, is a sort of a branch or funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. And that is the one that's been grooming Juan Guaido, and also has set up a blueprint for how to overthrow Venezuela, and they did that in 2010. They've been working on overthrowing Venezuela now since Chavez, so, you know, they're really doing their darndest to do that. It's really appalling, and it makes me kind of sick in the stomach that this is what some people do with their life. I don't know how they sleep at night. That's why they must be psychopaths. Seriously, you could only be a psychopath and do this kind of thing to countries and to people. And economic sanctions, you know, people die under economic sanctions. You know, the Iraq in the early 90s, when the US put economic sanctions on Iraq, 500,000 children died due to those economic sanctions. And when Madeleine Albright was asked, you know, was that worth it? She said, yes, it was worth it. That's what she said, Madeleine Albright, the former US Secretary of State. This is the sort of mentality of these people. So anyway, that's all I really wanted to say. So I would like to be able to put these videos out earlier, but like I've said, I can't really live stream anymore because in the last 6 months, the local tower, the government here, the right-wing government we have here is just trying to make everything sort of dysfunctional and then privatize everything. And so in the local, and they just have contempt anyway for rural customers. So it's not really functioning very well, and I can't really do live streams. The sort of download limit is like 2 megabytes per second, I kid you not, and trying to upload these videos to my channel, it takes, I mean, for a 20-minute video, it takes like about 5 hours. I'm not kidding. It takes like 5 hours to upload a 20-minute video. So if I don't get them out before the sun goes down, basically it's sort of still, it's still going at like 2 in the morning and stuff. I mean, but anyway, that's how it is, you know. What can you do? Anyway, so that's all I want to say. Please click the like button if you like the content. Please subscribe and click the notifications bell, otherwise you don't receive notifications of updates. And please also leave comments. I always enjoy comments, and you know, it's really great if people engage with the content. I hope that you checked out the vegan video yesterday, and I hope that if you're not vegan, that you consider checking out that I do these vegan videos, or I mention veganism within some of my talks that are about politics, because I like to show the relationship between various forms of discrimination. But I hope that you'll consider checking out yesterday's video about the humane deception, and I think you'll find that interesting. Okay, so thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time, bye for now.